See, in a democracy, the basic function for voters is also to hold the government accountable, right? And for people to hold the government accountable, you have to look at various aspects. And at the end of 5 years, it's difficult for individuals to remember everything that the government has done, right? And there are some people who care about health, there are some who care about agriculture, there are some who care about education. We felt that as Bahutva Karnataka, as a civil society organization, it's our duty to help people make an informed choice. And even in school, children get a report card. If you're working in a company, you have an annual appraisal. So why shouldn't the government have an appraisal? And the idea was to have a citizen's appraisal of the government, which will also help people make an informed choice when we vote. That was one aspect. The second aspect was that the ruling party was bringing in several non-issues while ignoring real issues. Right? You're talking about people who are dead and long gone. We're talking about things which don't matter to people, but we're not talking about education. We're not talking about the fact that farm income has fallen. We're not talking about how health has suffered. And we're not talking about accountability to all the uh, wrongdoings which have happened in the last 3-4 years. So it's because of both these reasons that we felt that it's important to come out with a report card.
What were the categories and
So the categories were education, health, nutrition, Karnataka's commitment to a federal structure, whether the government has upheld democracy, environment, agriculture, rural development, and panchayat raj, fiscal discipline, workers' rights, women's rights, rights of slum residents. These are the main heads under which we brought out the report cards.
what were the striking takeaways from when you started to analyze the government's function from last 5 years?
The
Not
most,
5 years, I think.
yeah, it's 3.5, 4 years. Right? The most striking thing is the fact that Karnataka has actually gone backward in quite a few sectors, and especially so with education. And that is the most striking thing. You always had governments which have not done much for the people, but at least we have not gone backwards. But here, in the last 3-4 years, we are afraid that we've actually taken several steps backwards, and it's going to take a long time for Karnataka to come out and go forward. And that is the most striking aspect. The other thing is, of course, that the government did not implement its own orders, its own decisions, its own policies also have not really been implemented. And there has been nothing new which has helped take the state forward. Whatever little progress has also been largely because of the continuance of existing policies. But there's really been nothing new. The government itself was found undemocratically through Operation Kamla, right? By poaching legislators from other parties and having elections again. And there's a lot of allegations of money changing hands and CDs which are being used to blackmail. And this is, the evidence to that is by the fact that the MLAs who switched and became ministers, many of them have moved court to get an injunction on CDs pertaining to them coming out, right? So that is the first step. The second step, as far as democracy is concerned, see, a fundamental feature of democracy is that people should be able to choose who governs them, and people should have a say in the functioning of the government. A striking feature of this government is the panchayat elections and the elections to the Bruhat Bengaluru Mahanagarapalike, Bangalore's municipal corporations, have not been held for 3 years. The High Court of Karnataka has in fact fined the government for not holding panchayat elections. And the BBMP elections, it's been more than 3.5 years. We don't have an elected corporator. We don't have an elected council. The state government is taking decisions for BBMP. And they say that, the delay is because the Congress moved court. But people moved court because they redrew ward boundaries and they did a lot of gerrymandering, and it's done very unscientifically. But the net result is there's no elected governments. The second thing, as far as democracy is concerned, is see, a fundamental duty of this government is also lawmaking, right? And we've seen that this government has brought out needless ordinances. An ordinance has to be used only in an emergency. For example, during COVID, you could have bought an ordinance to say government can take over private hospitals or regulate private hospitals better. That is not done. Instead, during the COVID first wave, the Karnataka government brought in an ordinance to amend the APMC Act to remove the restriction that traders have to buy only from the APMCs. And how did this ordinance happen? This ordinance happened because of pressure from Delhi. There is a letter from Niti Ayog written to the government of Karnataka asking them to amend Section 8B of the APMC Act. And they say that, the letter is also copied to the chief minister to ensure that this amendment happens, right? So this is a ordinance, this is an amendment which farmers didn't want. The central government rolled it back, but Karnataka didn't roll it back. They brought in other ordinances as well, right? They brought in an ordinance to attack conversion. which is not needed. Again, first of all, there's no legal basis, there's no factual basis to bring in anti-conversion law. It was brought in as an ordinance. So that is the second aspect of the threat to democracy under this government, the bringing in of ordinances. The third thing when you look at democracy is a fundamental aspect of democracy is rule of law. The question here is, where is the rule of law in Karnataka? Because of rule of law involves many things, right? That you have to follow procedure, that there is equality before law. All of these have been violated. If you look at the arrest of Disha Ravi from Bangalore, right? Disha Ravi was arrested, she was taken, there was no transit remand, laws were not followed, and the Karnataka government did not say anything, right? You had Chetan Ahimsa who was arrested for a tweet. And then you had people like Sharan Pampwell, Kali Swami, who threatened to kill Muslims, who celebrated the killing of Muslims, who called for the murder. No action is taken against them. Pramod Mutalik says that for every instance of love jihad, you take 10 Muslim women, and there's no FIR even against them, right? So, and if you look at the whole DJ Halli, KJ Halli incident, and you see the massive charges under UAPA, almost 400 plus people charged under UAPA, and there's a fact-finding report by civil society which says police did not follow basic CRPC while doing the arrests. People who were arrested were not told why they were arrested. Their family members were not told why they've been arrested. They had to run from pillar to post to find out even where they've been taken, right? So there is no rule of law in Karnataka. You see the government lying in the floor of the assembly, right? Around the hijab time, what happened was that the VHP and Bajrang Dal called for the boycott of Muslim vendors. They put up banners saying boycott Muslim vendors. No FIR against it. This is a basic violation of Article 14 and 15 of the Constitution. The government lies in the assembly. They say that there is an act which does not permit Muslims to vend, but the charitable endowments, the rules under that act only says that in temple property you cannot give long-term lease to non-Hindus. Street vending is not a question of lease or anything, right? So you have a government which is lying on the floor of the assembly, which is refusing to take action against the violations of the constitution, which is refusing to act against vigilantism. So the rule of law is entirely affected, and that is another aspect of shrinking democratic spaces. The third thing is democracy also requires a space for dissent, right? Now, the Karnataka High Court said that in Bangalore, for example, protests have to happen only at Freedom Park. And the government could have easily opposed it. Instead, the government gleefully agreed with the High Court and they restricted protests only to Freedom Park. As a result, our fundamental right to assembly, our fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression has been violated, right? Farmers in Devanhalli, which is close to Bangalore, they had their lands taken away, right? Acquisition. They wanted to protest. They protested in Devanhalli, where they're from. They had cases filed against them for protesting in Devanhalli. Paura Karmikas, so the municipal workers who sweep the streets, they've had cases filed against them. Asha workers, Anganwadi workers have had cases filed against them for protesting. Where is the space for dissent when, if somebody does a protest itself, you're not going to allow it, right? And when the whole hijab thing happened, that's another violation of rule of law, right? A basic of administrative law is that any decision has to happen on the basis of some facts, on the basis of some orders, right? Rule of law means that you have to follow the rules, write down what you're going to do. A fact-finding report by PUCL has shown that a lot of the actions which the education department took, schools and colleges took, were not on the basis of any written orders, but were on the basis of some video conference and oral instructions that this happened. And if you look at the whole hijab issue, the High Court never banned hijab. They only upheld a government order which said the CDC, College Development Committee, has the right to decide the clothing. But the Education Minister and the Home Minister deliberately misinterpreted the court orders to say that there is a hijab ban, and they enforced it not through written but through oral orders. So you have this government which lies, which does things without any basis of any orders, which lies in the assembly, which lies in government orders, which arrests even the most vulnerable section of people, raising their voice, asking for their right. So democracy has taken several steps back in Karnataka in the last 4 years.
Coming back to health, because we have seen a pandemic also happen in between, and just like any other city in India, most of the other cities in India, metropolis in India, there was a huge oxygen crisis even in Bangalore also. What is the take on that, and what is happening with the health sector?
That's a good question. Coming to the pandemic, it's almost like the government has learned no lessons from the pandemic, right? The BJP manifesto for 2018 says that they will improve district hospitals with central government funds. But what instead has happened is that 9 district hospitals are being privatized, right? They're going to go in the PPP route. So, what is the lesson from COVID if you're going to take public infrastructure and like privatize it? That is the first thing. The second thing is we must not forget what happened in Chamarajnagar, right? Where around 30 people died because of a lack of oxygen, which would have been completely avoided if the situation would have been managed better. And one aspect of health which has not been covered, which people have not been talking about now is during COVID, all the government hospitals were made COVID only hospitals, which meant that if you're poor and you have to deliver a baby, you have a heart attack, you have accident, you have any other health issue, you had no government hospital to go to. You could go only to a private hospital, right? And this really put lakhs of people in trouble, especially in the time of COVID. That has not been done. The only thing the government has done is they've decided to open number clinics on the basis of the Mohalla clinics in Delhi, and they have opened 100 plus clinics. But again, people in slums and others have been telling us that the number clinics suffer from a lack of infrastructure, a lack of medicine, a lack of nurses, lack of doctors, right? So it's almost like nothing much has been learned. The other thing where Karnataka has taken a step back is nutrition. Karnataka already had a huge malnutrition problem. We have more than half the women in Karnataka are anemic. We have a high number of degree of children under 5 and 6 who are either wasted or who have stunting. And COVID increased this malnutrition. And post COVID, there has not even been a survey to figure out how much malnutrition is there. That is one thing. The other thing is the previous government had started Indira canteens to offer low cost food to people. This government has all but shut down these Indira canteens. If you didn't like the name, you could have changed the name. You can change the name from Indira canteen to anything else that you want. But why shut down the canteens itself, right? They have been systematically, funds have been cut, no administrative attention to it, and it's almost shut. The other thing is during COVID, there was no midday meals because the schools were closed. So the government was giving dry ration to children. In 2021, this dry ration was not given for months. And an activist from Bahutva Karnataka, Siddharth, filed a RTI with the government. And then they say, yes, we've not been giving because we don't have funds. And then the RTI became public. And only then they started resuming the dry ration. And if you see this year in 2023, Shira Bhagya, which is a scheme started by the previous government where they give milk to school children, that has been stopped in around 11 districts because, for reasons best known to the government, but milk has not been supplied. And the Karnataka Food Commission, which is a government commission, pointed out problems with the midday meals given by Akshay Patra, right? Because there's no onion, garlic, the food is not fresh, and there are issues with the food. In spite of a food commission report, the government has not done anything. The only good thing that this government did was, after several protests by people across the state, they've introduced eggs in the midday meal scheme to address malnutrition. And even that, there was a administrative reforms commission which said that eggs have to be provided 6 days a week, including to adolescent girls, but it's been given 3 to 4 days a week. But that's about the only good thing on nutrition. Otherwise, on nutrition, we've gone several steps back.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
But what I would ask is that because the election is happening right
Yeah.
now, is any of this thing discussed in the election campaigns apart from the manifestos? Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate part. A lot of it is not being discussed in the election campaigns, but there are some crucial issues which are discussed in the election campaign, and one of them is price rise, because price rise has hit several people hard. It's everything from the price of gas to the price of cooking oil to the price of rice, and even to the price of like basic clothing, right? All of these have increased, and that is being spoken about in the election campaigns. But the details of health and what happened, or like the increasing privatization of health or the problems with education, unfortunately they're not being spoken about much. The report card was also an attempt to drive the conversation towards these issues. While it has made some impact and it has brought the issue to the fore, it's not really become widespread as such.
One of the thing for Karnataka has been coming having a spotlight has been about the religious issues, like at least communal violence that is happening in part of the country. I'm not saying about a large scale violence which also happened in between, but every day there's a news about a hate speech or a hate violence crime that is happening in the state. What is your take on those issues?
So there are two aspects to those, right? If you see, both the ruling party and the opposition are saying hijab and halal are not an issue, and both of them are not speaking about hijab or halal. But the question remains that thousands of schoolgirls, thousands of Muslim girls suffered due to hijab. Who's going to be held accountable for the for their loss of education for a year? Who's going to be accountable for vitiating the environment in classrooms where like Hindus and Muslims are like now having a divide? Who's going to be held accountable for taking Karnataka backwards as far as education is concerned? So it's become a situation where both ruling and opposition party don't want to talk about it. There are some community leaders also from minority communities who don't want to talk about it because they fear that it will further polarize the election, and they don't want it to be polarized. But which is the unfortunate part, that we fear, or like religious minorities have to fear that speaking about things which affected them and even asking accountability for them will polarize. That shows that shows the amount to which a democratic space in Karnataka is vitiated. And why I say it's a vitiation of democratic space is, Baba Sahib Ambedkar said that democracy is nothing but uh, uh, democracy is about living together, right? Democracy is a form of associated living, is what he said. But that associated living is torn apart, right? It's caste, it's gender, it's in terms of like religious minorities. That associated living has been torn. If you see, even women, in Karnataka's history, the highest number of crimes against women was recorded in 2021. And what the government has done is there's something called Santwana Kendras, which was started by previous governments. These are centers, even in taluk levels, which offer support to women who face domestic violence and sexual violence. Around one third of the Santwana Kendras have been shut. They have a very small budget. All the Santwana Kendras together need maybe 4 to 6 crores, but one third of those centers have been shut. Right, that's what has been happening. Even if you look at the question of violence against the Dalit community, the violence against Dalit community has increased in the last 3-4 years. This government said that they'll start a scheme to eradicate untouchability or to address untouchability. It was called the Vinay Sreenivasa Yojana. The scheme has not taken off at all. Nothing has moved on the scheme. And in fact, if you see, scholarships to Dalits, Adivasi students have been delayed or like denied. Scholarships to minority students have been denied. These are the ways. So, every government since independence has tried to bring more people into the education fold, right? You try to bring girls into the education fold. You try to bring marginalized students into the education fold. This is the first government which has been trying to push people out of the education fold. And this government also wanted to merge 13,000 government schools, saying that there's not enough enrollment. But it's not merger, but like they actually wanted to close these government schools. So instead of seeing a strengthening of the education system, we've seen a weakening of the education system, both primary and higher education system.